The palace walls of Oro tasted like dust and fear. To 7-year-old Amina, perched on a low stool beside her mother, Layla, the third wife, the vast courtyard felt less like home and more like a beautiful cage filled with watchful eyes. The afternoon sun beat down, glinting off the intricate gold threads woven into the robes of King Musa as he listened to elders. But Amina's world narrowed to the soft click-click of the indigo beads her mother nervously threaded between her fingers. Layla, with eyes like deep pools reflecting storm clouds, was the palace's quiet storm. Loved fiercely, silently, by the king, she was a constant thorn in the side of the established order. That order was embodied by Mama, King Musa's mother. Seated on a higher stool, draped in imposing ankara, Mama's gaze was a physical weight. Her power wasn't just in her title as Queen Mother, it was in the iron will that bent tradition and people to her desires. Beside her, radiating ambition like heat from stone, sat Binta, the second wife. Binta's smile towards Layla never reached her eyes, which held the cold glint of a knife. Her son, Umar, 10 years old and already strutting with the arrogance of assured inheritance, sneered at Amina whenever the adults weren't looking. Amina shrank closer to Layla. She felt the hatred, thick and cloying as the humidity before the rains. Such a delicate flower, our Layla, Mama's voice, deceptively smooth, cut through the murmur. The king's favor shines brightly upon you. But remember, her eyes flickered to Amina, flowers in the wrong soil can wilt or poison the garden. The unspoken threat hung heavy. Layla's hand tightened on Amina's shoulder. Later, in the dim coolness of their quarters, Layla knelt before Amina. Her face, usually serene, was etched with worry. "My little moonbeam," she whispered, her voice catching. "This place, it is not safe for us." The smiles hide teeth. She pressed a small, cool object into Amina's palm. It was a single bead from her necklace, the deepest indigo, smooth and cool. "Keep this, Amina. Always. Hide it. If anything happens, remember me by this. Remember you are royal blood. Remember Ibrahim, the guard with the kind eyes near the fig tree. Find him if you are lost." Amina clutched the bead, the weight of her mother's fear settling in her small chest like a stone. "Why, Mama? Why are they angry?" "Jealousy, my love," Layla murmured, pulling her close. "Jealousy is a sickness that rots the soul. They covet what your father gives freely to us, his love. And they fear you, my daughter. They fear your place." The sickness came swiftly. It was after a small, private meal, a supposed gesture of peace initiated by Mama and attended only by her, Binta, and Layla. Musa was away, mediating a land dispute. That evening, Layla staggered into their room, clutching her stomach, her face already gray with agony. "Amina," she gasped, collapsing. What followed was a nightmare seared into Amina's young mind. Her mother writhed on the floor, convulsing, foam-tinged pink with blood bubbling at her lips. Her eyes, wide with terror and pain, locked onto Amina's. Amina crouched, frozen, behind a heavy curtain, her small hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her screams. Layla's body arched in a final, violent spasm. With a guttural gasp, her hand flailed towards the curtain where Amina hid. "Run! Ibrahim, the bead, remember." The words were a wet rattle. Then her eyes glazed over, fixed and empty, staring at nothing. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the convulsions. Before Amina could even crawl out, the door burst open. Mama swept in, Binta close behind, her face a mask of carefully crafted horror. Mama took one look at Layla's contorted body and pointed a bony finger. "Evil spirits," she declared, her voice echoing with false piety. I felt it. The darkness clung to her. She brought it upon herself, and now it taints the child. Her accusing finger swung towards Amina, who had stumbled out from her hiding place, tears streaming down her face. "The curse lives in her. She must be cleansed, or the whole kingdom will suffer. No one questioned Mama. In the superstitious heart of the palace, her word was law. That night, under the guise of a sacred purification ritual, Amina was ripped from the room where her mother's body still lay. Rough hands grabbed her. As they dragged her down a torchlit corridor towards the palace gates, a figure lunged from the shadows. Ibrahim, the guard with kind eyes, his face grim. "Release her," he roared, shoving one guard aside and grabbing Amina. He shoved her roughly but protectively into a dark alcove behind a massive urn. "Stay!" Silent, he hissed. Then he turned, drawing his ceremonial dagger to face the others. Mama appeared, her eyes glacial. "Traitor," she spat. "Seize him. Execute him. Now!" Amina, pressed into the suffocating darkness, watched through a crack. She saw Ibrahim fight, saw the flash of blades, saw him overwhelmed. Saw Mama nod once, cold and final. Saw the downward thrust of a spear. Ibrahim's body jerked, then slumped. His dying gaze seemed to find hers in the shadows, a final plea for silence, for survival. Amina bit her lip until she tasted blood, swallowing the scream that threatened to tear her apart. One of Mama's most trusted servants, a man whose eyes avoided Amina's terrified gaze, roughly bundled her into a covered cart. They traveled for hours through the night. He never spoke. At dawn, near a sprawling, chaotic market in a city choked with fumes and noise, he stopped. He opened the back, pulled Amina out, and dropped her onto the filthy roadside. "Disappear, cursed child," he muttered, his voice thick with something that might have been shame or fear. "Or worse will find you." The cart rattled away, leaving Amina alone in a sea of strange faces and overwhelming stench. She was 7 years old. She had seen her mother poisoned, her protector murdered. She was utterly alone. The city was a monster. Hunger became her constant, gnawing companion. Fear was her blanket. She slept in stinking alleyways, curled up beside overflowing bins, flinching at every sound. She learned to move like a shadow, to snatch half-eaten fruit cores or discarded scraps of bread. She learned the hard way that kindness was rare and often came with hidden claws. Men leered, older street children stole the little she scavenged, rain soaked her to the bone, and the sun baked the grime onto her skin. She shed the name Amina. It belonged to a dead princess, a ghost. She became nobody. The indigo bead, strung on a grubby piece of twine, was her only secret, hidden beneath layers of rags against her skin. Her mother's voice, "Remember the bead," was the faintest echo in the howling void of her existence. Years blurred into a gray tapestry of survival. Nobody grew tall but gaunt, her eyes perpetually shadowed, her movements wary and quick. She carried heavy loads for pennies that barely bought cassava flour. She swept market stalls at dawn, the sharp smell of rotting produce her morning air. She learned silence, not just of speech, but of hope. The palace was a fever dream, a half-remembered nightmare of gold and blood. Only in the deepest, coldest nights, clutching the bead until it left an imprint on her palm, did a ghost of feeling stir, a phantom ache for a mother's embrace, a scent of jasmine and safety. Then came the great dry. The rains failed. The rivers shrank to muddy trickles. Crops withered in the fields. The city, already struggling, descended into a desperate scramble for survival. Food prices became impossible. The scraps nobody relied on vanished. Hunger, the old familiar beast, returned with savage fury. It clawed at her insides, a constant, grinding pain that blurred her vision and turned her legs to water. Days bled into each other, marked only by the intensifying agony in her belly. One scorching afternoon, weak with dizziness, she stumbled into a vacant lot on the city's fringes. Dust devils swirled over cracked, barren earth. Nothing grew here but tough, gray-green blades of grass, bleached by the relentless sun. She collapsed to her knees, her vision swimming. The hunger was no longer just pain, it was a roaring void threatening to swallow her whole. Her hands, trembling violently, reached out. Her fingers closed around a clump of the dry, fibrous grass. The memory of eating stolen mangoes in the palace gardens flashed, absurd and cruel. A dry sob rattled in her chest. Survival instinct, raw and primal, overrode everything. She tore at the grass, stuffing the coarse blades into her mouth. It tasted like dust and bitterness. It scratched her throat, making her gag. Her stomach, empty for so long, cramped violently in protest. She retched, bringing up only bile and grass fibers. Tears of frustration and utter degradation mingled with the dust on her cheeks. But the void demanded filling. She ripped up another handful, chewing frantically, choking it down. It hurt. It was humiliating. It was life. She ate grass, not once, but every day she found herself in that lot, hidden from judging eyes, forcing down the only thing the parched earth offered. It became her secret shame, her testament to how far the princess had fallen. The bead felt cold against her skin, a tiny, mocking reminder of a world lost. One day, as she crawled, seeking untouched patches of the miserable sustenance, a shadow fell over her. An old woman, Hagia, bent with age but eyes sharp with compassion, stood watching. She didn't speak, just gently helped nobody to her feet, her touch surprisingly strong. Hagia led her to a tiny shack leaning against a market wall. It smelled of peanuts and wood smoke. Hagia gave her weak, unsweetened tea and a small piece of hard cassava bread. Slowly, child, Hagia murmured, her voice raspy but kind. The stomach forgets food. Go slow. For a few fragile weeks, Hagia became an anchor. She called her child. She shared her meager rations without expectation. One evening, Hagia took nobody's grimy hand and pressed a small, smooth blue bead into it. It was ordinary glass, unlike the precious indigo ceramic one hidden beneath her clothes. Take this, child, Hagia said, her eyes holding a depth of understanding. For protection. The world is hard, but kindness finds a way. Hold on to it. Hagia tied it onto a fresh piece of string. Nobody, for the first time in years, felt a flicker of something warm inside the frozen wasteland of her heart. She clutched Hagia's bead, adding it to her hidden treasure. She remembered her mother's whisper, "Remember the bead." Hagia's simple gift felt like an echo of that love. Then, Hagia fell ill. A fever racked her frail body. In 3 days, she was gone. The shack felt colder, emptier than any alley ever had. Nobody stood over the simple shroud, the two beads, Hagia's glass blue and Layla's deep indigo, clenched tight in her fist. The fragile warmth was extinguished. The world was ash again. She walked away, the familiar numbness settling deeper, colder. She was 26 years old. 19 years had passed since the night her world ended. She was a ghost, walking through a dying land. The Great Dry had spread its skeletal fingers across the entire region, reaching even the once fertile lands of Oro Kingdom. The rivers feeding the kingdom were mere trickles, the fields dust bowls. Starvation wasn't a threat, it was a grim reality gnawing at the edges of villages, creeping towards the capital. Desperate farmers, their ribs stark against sun-leathered skin, abandoned their barren plots and flooded the city, seeking mercy from their king. Inside the gilded cage of Oro Palace, the atmosphere was thick with tension. King Musa, now visibly aged, his shoulders bowed under the weight of rulership and a sorrow that never lifted, paced his chambers. The portraits of his wives adorned the walls. His gaze lingered longest on Layla's serene face, then drifted to an empty space where a portrait of a little girl with bright eyes should have been. The guilt was a constant ache, a wound that festered beneath the royal robes. Mama's assurances about the cursed child and the necessary cleansing rang hollow now, drowned out by the cries of his starving people and the ghost of his daughter. The people demand action, Kabiyesi, an elder implored, his voice strained. They starve at our gates. They whisper that the gods are angry. Mama, seated regally beside the throne, her face a mask of imperious calm though her hands betrayed a faint tremor, spoke. The gods are not angry without cause. Perhaps the drought is a final purge, removing the unworthy. Her eyes, sharp as flint, scanned the room. But we must show strength. Alms. A public distribution. Let them see their king's benevolence. And, her gaze landed pointedly on Umar, now a tall, arrogant man of 25, groomed relentlessly as crown prince. The crown prince must be seen. He must show his heart for the people. It is tradition. It is necessary. Umar, resplendent in embroidered robes, barely suppressed a sneer. Distribute our dwindling grain to those, peasants? Let them farm better. His sense of entitlement, nurtured by Binta and Mama, was absolute. Silence, Umar. Musa's voice, rarely raised, cracked like a whip. The grief he carried often morphed into a simmering anger. Your grandmother speaks wisdom. You will stand with me. You will hand out the grain. You will show compassion, or you will learn what it means to truly want. The unspoken comparison, to the daughter lost to the streets, perhaps to starvation, hung heavy in the air. Umar flushed but bowed his head, resentment burning in his eyes. Binta, still beautiful but with eyes hardened by years of scheming and unearned power, placed a placating hand on Umar's arm. Of course, Kabiyesi. Umar understands his duty. He will be the image of royal grace. She shot Umar a warning look. This was about perception, about securing his future throne. The day of the almsgiving dawned, hot and merciless. The air vibrated with desperation. Thousands gathered in the vast square before the palace gates, a sea of gaunt faces, sunken eyes, skeletal limbs protruding from rags. The stench of unwashed bodies and despair was overwhelming. King Musa, flanked by grim-faced guards, sat under a canopy. Beside him, Mama radiates steely authority. Umar stood stiffly on a slightly raised platform before a large, heavily guarded vat of grain and barrels of precious water, his expression a mixture of boredom and barely concealed disgust. He held a long-handled scoop like it was contaminated. Guards formed a narrow, turbulent channel towards Umar. The distribution began. It was a slow, agonizing trickle. Scoops of grain, pitifully small, were dropped into outstretched bowls, hands, scraps of cloth. Arguments flared. Guards shoved people back. The heat, the hunger, the sheer press of bodies created a volatile energy. Amina, nobody, was part of that desperate tide. 19 years of street-hardened instinct screamed at her to avoid such crowds, such exposure. But the drought had stolen even her meager sources of food. The gnawing emptiness in her belly, the ghost of grass fibers scratching her throat, drove her forward. She had to try. She pushed her way through the throng, her own tattered cloth held ready, her eyes fixed on the scoop in Umar's hand. She was weak, dizzy from days without proper food, her vision blurring at the edges. Just as she neared the front of the surging crowd, a commotion erupted behind her. Someone fell. A ripple of panic surged forward. Amina was caught in the press, shoved violently from behind. She lost her footing. With a cry that was barely a whisper, she stumbled forward and crashed heavily onto the dusty ground at Umar's feet. Her meager begging bowl clattered away, rolling uselessly. Her headscarf, loosened by the fall, slipped down around her shoulders. Umar, jolted from his bored detachment, recoiled instinctively. Annoyance twisted his handsome face. Clumsy beggar, he snapped, his voice cutting through the nearby din. He looked down, intending to kick her bowl aside or have a guard drag her away. His gaze landed on her. She was trying to push herself up, her face turned slightly away, her neck exposed where the scarf had fallen. Dust coated her gaunt cheeks, her cracked lips. Her eyes, wide with fear and the disorientation of the fall, briefly met his. Then Umar saw it. Just below her right ear, partially obscured by grime but unmistakable, was a small, pale, crescent-shaped scar. Time stopped. His father's voice, thick with grief and cheap palm wine, echoed in his memory from years ago. Musa, slumped on a balcony overlooking the silent courtyard, tears streaming down his face. Your little sister, Umar. Amina, so small, running near the throne, she slipped, caught her neck on the sharp gold edge of the footstool. Oh gods, the blood. I held her, such a tiny crescent scar, my little moonbeam. Umar, then a teenager, had dismissed it as the drunken ramblings of a weakling haunted by a cursed child. He'd been taught she was a blight, removed for the kingdom's good. But seeing that scar now, on this emaciated, dirt-encrusted face, the face that, beneath the layers of hardship and grime, held a haunting, impossible resemblance to the portrait of Layla that haunted his father's chambers. The eyes, the shape of the brow, the set of the jaw beneath the gauntness. The truth hit Umar like a physical blow. It wasn't a drunken fantasy. It was real. This broken creature in the dust wasn't just a beggar. She was the ghost. She was Amina, his sister, the daughter whose mother his mother had poisoned, the child whose life they had stolen, whose throne he now stood upon. The implications exploded in his mind. The lies, the murder, the throne built on the bones of a child cast out to eat grass. His mother's whispered assurances turned to ash in his mouth. The arrogance that was his armor shattered. He saw the utter desperation in her eyes, the primal fear, the degradation etched into every line of her being. He understood, viscerally, the abyss she had been thrown into. The throne beneath his feet felt like it was collapsing, dragging him down into the filth of their crime. The color drained from Umar's face. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. A strangled gasp escaped his lips, a sound of utter disbelief and soul-crushing realization. His hand holding the grain scoop went limp. The scoop clattered loudly onto the platform, spilling its meager contents into the dust. He stumbled back one step, then another, his royal bearing utterly gone, replaced by the trembling shock of a man who had just seen hell open at his feet. And no, he breathed, the word barely audible over the crowd's murmur, which had now hushed, sensing something monumental. The commotion drew all eyes. King Musa, frowning, leaned forward. Umar? What is it? Mama, her sharp instinct screaming danger, followed Umar's frozen, horrified gaze to the woman on the ground. She saw the fear, the dirt, and then her eyes, honed by decades of observation and malice, locked onto the movement at the woman's neck. As Amina, terrified by Umar's intense, horrified stare and the sudden attention, scrambled back on her elbows, her hand instinctively flew to clutch the neckline of her ragged dress. The motion pulled the hidden beads loose. Hajia's simple blue glass bead swung free. And next to it, visible against the filthy fabric, was the other bead, the deep, rare indigo ceramic bead. The bead from Layla's ceremonial necklace. The bead Mama herself had seen Layla wear 1,000 times. The bead that had vanished the night Layla died and Amina disappeared. Recognition, cold and absolute, slammed into Mama with the force of a thunderbolt. Her carefully constructed edifice of lies, her decades of ruthless control, crumbled in an instant. The proof was undeniable, the scar Umar saw, the bead she recognized, the ghost of Layla staring back from the dust. Her hand flew to her chest, not in regal gesture, but in a spasm of pure, unadulterated terror. A guttural, inhuman sound ripped from her throat, not a word, but the raw expression of a lifetime of evil laid bare. Her eyes, wide with dawning, catastrophic understanding, met Umar's across the platform. She saw the same horror, the same accusation reflected there. The weight of it, the murder, the betrayal, the monstrous act against her own grandchild, was crushing. Her legs gave way. She collapsed backwards into her ornate chair, her face a mask of ashen, crumbling ruin. Her reign, built on poison and lies, ended not with a decree, but with the silent accusation of a single indigo bead in the dust. King Musa, seeing his mother collapse and his son frozen in shock, pushed himself up. Confused, alarmed, he stepped down from the canopy, guards scrambling to flank him. "Mother? Umar?" His gaze swept the scene, the spilled grain, the hushed crowd, the terrified woman on the ground clutching her neck. He moved closer, his steps heavy with dread. Amina, sensing the king's approach, flinched, curling tighter into herself, trying to become invisible again. She turned her face away, pressing it into the dirt, but the movement fully exposed the side of her neck, and the small, pale crescent scar. Musa saw it. He stopped dead. The world narrowed to that tiny mark. Memory flooded him, the sharp cry, the tiny body falling, the glint of gold, the blood welling, the frantic panic, the delicate crescent left behind when it healed. Amina's scar. His Amina's scar. His eyes snapped to her face. He saw past the grime, the gauntness, the years of suffering. He saw Layla's eyes, filled with terror now, not love. He saw the shape of Layla's mouth, the curve of her jaw beneath the hardship. He saw his daughter. Not a ghost. Flesh and blood, broken and discarded. The breath left Musa's body in a ragged, wounded gasp. Amina. The name was a whisper torn from the deepest, most wounded part of his soul. Then it became a broken sob, raw and guttural. Amina! The mighty king of Oro didn't walk. He stumbled. He fell to his knees in the dust of the public square, his royal robes instantly stained. Tears, unchecked, streamed down his weathered face, carving paths through the dust on his cheeks. He reached out a trembling, desperate hand towards the cowering figure. "My child, my moonbeam." Amina flinched violently from his touch. She stared at the weeping man in the fine robes kneeling in the dirt. She stared at Umar, pale and shaking like a leaf. She stared at Mama, collapsed in her chair, a ruined monument to evil. The name, Amina, echoed in her mind, not as a memory, but as a key turning in a lock frozen shut for 19 years. The dam broke. Not with a scream, but with a silent, body-racking convulsion. She didn't see a king or a throne. She saw the gilded cage that had birthed her, the place where her mother was murdered, the origin of the darkness that condemned her to eat grass and sleep with rats. She saw the faces of her tormentors, Mama, Binta, watching from the canopy, her own face now a mask of dawning terror, Umar. She saw the broken man who was her father, who had failed her utterly. The memories surged, not as fragments, but as a crushing tsunami, her mother's smile, warm and safe. The scent of jasmine in their room. The click-click of the indigo beads. The horrifying convulsions. The foam. The whispered plea, "Run, remember the bead." Ibrahim's kind eyes, then his body jerking, falling. The rough cart ride. The stench of the city. The gnawing hunger. The taste of dirt and bitter grass. The feel of worms on her skin in the drain. Hajia's gentle touch, her sudden stillness. The relentless, grinding struggle just to exist. The sheer, overwhelming injustice of it all, the stolen life, the stolen love, the stolen childhood, crashed down upon her. It wasn't joy that filled her, it was a grief so profound, so all-consuming, it threatened to tear her apart from the inside. She didn't reach for her father. She curled tighter, fetal, pressing her face into the unforgiving earth of the kingdom she should have inherited. Her body shook violently, racked by silent sobs that tore at her throat but made no sound. The only sounds were the king's broken weeping and the horrified gasp of the crowd. Her fist, clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palm, pressed against her chest. Inside it, clutched with the desperation of a drowning woman, were the two beads, Hajia's simple blue glass, a symbol of fleeting kindness in the darkness, and Layla's deep indigo ceramic, a symbol of love murdered and a birthright drowned in blood and bitter grass. The tears that finally escaped, hot and silent, weren't for the throne offered in the dust. They were for the mother lost, for the childhood spent in hell, for the innocent girl named Amina who had died the night she tasted grass, leaving only this broken vessel of pain kneeling in the dust of Oro. The grass princess had survived, but the cost was written in every line of her ravaged face, in the silent scream that finally found its voice in the shaking of her shoulders and the cold, hard beads pressed against her broken heart. The throne loomed, a gilded monument to her suffering, and the weight of her past and the terrifying uncertainty of her future pressed down, heavier than any crown. The silence after the storm, the square was eerily silent. Thousands held their breath, bearing witness to the unraveling of a royal house. King Musa knelt in the dust, his shoulders shaking with sobs, his outstretched hand hovering over Amina's curled form like a benediction he knew he didn't deserve. Umar stood frozen on the platform, grain scattered at his feet, his face a mask of ashen horror, the arrogance replaced by the dawning comprehension of his complicity. Mama remained slumped in her chair, eyes wide and unseeing, her mouth working soundlessly, a vessel emptied of power and filled only with dread. Amina didn't move. Her body remained coiled tight, a protective shell against the tsunami of memory and grief crashing over her. The beads, Hajia's blue glass and Layla's deep indigo, were icy points of contact against her palm, anchors in the terrifying flood. The king's tears meant nothing. His outstretched hand felt like another threat. This man, her father, was the architect of the cage that killed her mother. His weakness was her death sentence 19 years ago. Reckoning in the palace, the stunned silence broke into a cacophony of whispers, then shouts. Guards, uncertain, looked from their broken king to the ruined queen mother. Elders exchanged terrified glances. The crowd's desperation momentarily shifted to shock, then a rising tide of anger and morbid fascination. The lost princess? The grass princess? Musa, finally breaking from his paralysis of grief, made the first decisive act of his reign in decades. He raised his tear-streaked face, his voice raw but carrying the weight of kingship for the first time since Layla died. Guards. The command cracked like thunder. Escort the Queen Mother immediately to her chambers. She is unwell. She is not to leave. No visitors. His eyes, red-rimmed but burning with a terrible clarity, swept to Mama. There was no affection, only cold fury and profound betrayal. The guards, loyal to the throne, not the schemer, moved swiftly. They lifted Mama's limp form. Her eyes finally focused, locking onto Musa's with a silent plea, but found only ice. As they carried her away, a low moan escaped her lips, the sound of a world collapsing. Musa then turned his gaze to Umar, who flinched as if struck. Prince Umar, the title sounded like an accusation, you will retire to your quarters. Now. You are confined until further notice. Umar didn't argue. He stumbled backwards, almost falling off the platform, his eyes darting wildly between his father and Amina still huddled in the dust. He fled into the palace, the picture of a prince undone. Finally, Musa looked at Binta, who had been watching with mounting terror from the canopy. Second wife Binta, his voice was dangerously low, you will accompany me. Now. Binta paled, her carefully constructed composure shattering. She followed him, trembling, into the palace, knowing her fate hung by a thread spun from lies. Musa didn't forget Amina. He turned back, his expression crumbling again. My daughter. He whispered, reaching out once more. Amina flinched violently, scrambling backwards on her elbows like a wounded animal, her eyes wide with primal fear. A low, guttural whimper escaped her, the first sound she'd truly made since the fall. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of a soul flayed raw. Musa recoiled as if burned. He saw the terror, the utter lack of recognition except as a source of pain. He understood. He raised his hands, palms out, in a gesture of surrender. All right, his voice broke. Guards. Clear the square. Distribute the remaining grain swiftly. This gathering is over. He turned to his most trusted advisor, an elderly man who had served his father. Jelani. See to the princess. Do not touch her unless she permits. Offer water, food, shelter. But only if she wishes. Protect her. From everyone. Amina didn't step into the palace willingly. Jelani, the elderly advisor, proved patient and kind. He didn't push. He sat quietly at a distance in the now empty square as dusk fell, offering only a clean gourd of water and a wrapped portion of soft, fresh bread. Amina watched him for hours, the primal fear warring with the gnawing hunger she knew too well. Eventually, thirst won. She crept forward, snatched the water and bread, and retreated, wolfing it down like a feral creature. Jelani returned every day. He brought simple food, clean water, and a quiet presence. He spoke softly, not of thrones or palaces, but of the weather, the resilience of baobab trees, the kindness of Hagia that he had heard whispers about. Slowly, infinitesimally, the terror in Amina's eyes began to recede, replaced by a wary exhaustion. It took weeks for her to accept shelter, not in the main palace, but in a small, clean gardener's cottage on the palace grounds, surrounded by blooming flowers, a sight that triggered both pain and a flicker of memory. Musa respected her boundaries. He sent gifts, simple clothes, books, art supplies, but never came himself. He communicated only through Jelani, apologies that felt hollow even written, promises of safety, offers of anything she desired. Her healing was agonizingly slow. Nightmares plagued her, the taste of grass, smell of her mother's death, the thud of Ibrahim's body. She flinched at loud noises, struggled with trust, found the opulence of even the gardens overwhelming. She wore the beads constantly, Hagia's blue and Layla's indigo, tangible links to the only love she'd known. The kingdom buzzed with her story, the grass princess, the lost heiress found in the dust. Sympathy warred with curiosity, reverence with pity. Amina hated it. She found solace in the quiet cottage, in tending a small patch of herbs, and in unexpected moments with palace staff who remembered Layla with genuine fondness and shared small, precious memories of her mother's kindness. A year passed. The drought finally broke. Rain lashed the earth, washing away the dust of famine. Musa, aged but carrying a new, quieter strength, requested an audience. He came to the cottage garden, not in royal robes, but simple attire. He didn't approach, he stood at the edge of the herb patch she was tending. Amina, he said, his voice thick. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I failed you. I failed your mother. My weakness allowed evil to flourish. He paused, swallowing hard. The throne, it is yours by birthright. But I will not force it upon you. It is a place of great pain for you. If you wish, I will abdicate. You can rule. Or, you can choose another path. Whatever you desire, wealth, land, education, a life far from here, it is yours. You owe Aro nothing. Amina didn't look up immediately. She finished carefully placing a seedling into the damp earth. The smell of petrichor and fresh soil was a stark contrast to the dust and grass of her memories. She finally stood, wiping her hands on her simple dress. She looked at her father, truly looked at him. She saw the grief etched deep, the regret, the profound weariness. She saw not the powerful king, but a broken man who had also lost everything that night long ago. I don't want the throne, she said, her voice low but clear, still rough from disuse and tears. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. It's built on my mother's bones and my hunger. She touched the indigo bead at her neck. But I won't run anymore. She looked out at the palace, then beyond its walls, to the town where people were rebuilding their lives after the drought. Hagia, she gave me a bead for protection and kindness. She fed me when she had little. Amina's eyes met Musa's, holding a fierce, hard-won light. Use the royal treasury. Not for palaces. Not for gold. Build grain stores that never empty. Dig wells that never run dry. Fund clinics in every village. Schools. Especially for girls. Her voice strengthened. Make sure no child, ever has to eat grass to survive in Oro again. That is my request. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a demand born from her pain, a legacy forged in suffering. Musa, tears welling again, bowed his head deeply, a king humbled before his daughter's impossible strength. It will be done, Amina. By my life, it will be done. Your word is law in this. Amina didn't become queen. She became the guardian. She remained in the gardener's cottage, a quiet, watchful presence. She oversaw Musa's projects with a sharp, practical eye honed by survival. She visited the new clinics and schools, not as royalty, but as a woman who understood the cost of neglect. Children instinctively trusted her quiet strength. People began calling her Aya Agbado, Mother of the Corn, a tribute to the granaries she filled. She never wore a crown. She wore her beads. She never forgot the taste of grass. It fueled her relentless drive to ensure others never knew it. The palace remained a place of ghosts for her, but the kingdom outside its walls became her garden. She planted seeds of change, watered by the tears of her past, growing a future where survival didn't require degradation, and where the only throne that mattered was the dignity of a full belly and a safe childhood. The grass princess found her purpose not in reclaiming a gilded cage, but in ensuring the fields outside it would always bear fruit. Her tears, though still shed in private for the mother she lost and the childhood stolen, were finally mingled with the quiet satisfaction of preventing other tears from ever being shed for the same reason. The scar on her neck remained, a silent testament, but the grass she remembered now nourished the hope of a kingdom.